Welcome to Voices of Liberty, where we share the stories of people who are advancing real freedom right here, right now, in our lifetime. I'm Sean Themea, and I'm joined today by Kent Lassman, President and CEO of the Competitive Enterprise Institute, CEI for short. Kent has spent his entire career fighting for the principles that make our country great and free: limited government, free markets, deregulation, and so much more. Under his leadership, CEI has been a driving force for policies and that put people, not bureaucracies, in charge of their own destiny. Kent will talk to us today about what liberty means to him, how he got involved in the fight for freedom, and what you can do to advance freedom moving forward. So Kent, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. It's a bit of a treat to see you again. I know that we're looking at monitors. I've really enjoyed visiting with you when I've been able to take part in your big annual conference down in Orlando.
Absolutely. Well, it's been great to have you. Great speaker. The kids always love hearing from you. So appreciate you being here with us today. Well, let's kick it off. I always love to hear a good origin story, right? So tell us, Kent, how did you get involved in the fight for freedom in the first place?
I backed into it. I was very fortunate, and people helped me along the way, but it started, that spider bite, or whatever that other moment was that put me on the first path, was a relative, a cousin of mine who I didn't really know well. He was about 10 years older than me. He approached me one weekend. I saw him when I was a freshman in college, and he said, "I have homework for you." And I said, no, I'm fine. I have plenty of work to do. I don't need homework. And he gave me a copy of a book. And he said, "I'm going to ask you about this when I see you next in a couple weeks." And that book was The Road to Serfdom. And I had never encountered anything like it at all. The economic concepts, understanding history through this lens of the role of states as opposed to individuals, Napoleon or Churchill or something like that, but through the role that states played and the actions that they took, whether they were democratic or undemocratic. And it was that road to serfdom that put me on the path. About a year and a half later, I was doing my first internship. And from there, you might say there was a path dependency. My first internship was at a think tank where they were focused on domestic policy, and I started to learn about the development of research and ideas and how they fit together. And it was, like I said, it was a bit of an accident for me and a very fortunate one. I'm grateful all the time for people that looked after me and gave me things to read, helped me understand what was in front of me.
For those who haven't read Hayek's great work of Road to Serfdom, if you could explain the core takeaway from that book that got you down this path to liberty, how would you put that in your own words?
My goodness. So Friedrich Hayek he was writing in exile. He was writing in the lead up to World War II. He was in exile because he had been forced to leave Austria. And he was documenting how the concentration of decision-making and key information was being held within the hands of the state, or in that case, the Nazi Party. And the problems that presented, he was explicating in sort of a polemic style writing some of the ideas that he'd been developing in the academy about, for example, he gives us the idea of the knowledge problem. And the knowledge problem has two parts. The first is there's no central authority, there's no bureau or agency or good-natured or well-intentioned agency that could ever know enough about the economy to collect the right information for setting prices or setting production levels or telling who to produce or where they should produce and what they should produce. That part of the knowledge problem he saw in the war economy or the pre-war economy as people were building in Germany toward World War II. The second part of the knowledge problem is really what puts nations and people on the path to serfdom. And that is by collecting all of that centrally and distributing it out centrally and saying, you, Sean, over here, you're going to be an auto mechanic, and the next person down is going to be an artist and create great art for the nation, and the third person is going to be a teacher. By taking that step, we foreclose the development of new ideas, and we shut down innovation, and we shut down the learning process that actually informs so that you know how much bread to produce. Or famously put by another at another time in another era, but also in the context of war. Isn't it funny how in Paris, the Bureau of Lunch seems to know how to get just the right amount of sandwiches all across the city for everyone to have their soup and sandwiches? When in fact, that's not how it happens. We know that it's markets that produce that information that allow the different shopkeepers to sell to people who make in their own home or to sell to the restaurants, such that a teeming metropolis like Paris can produce enough meals for everyone. And really, I think Hayek was the person who put his finger on in a way for the world to see that state power and centralizing state power was going to be a vice clamp on liberty, and it would be a vice clamp on the productive tools of a population to make their life and the lives of others better off.
Yeah. No, that's great. And it's such an important realization for young people to make. And, what I remind students is like Hayek, to crudely paraphrase Hayek, right? The government is at best incompetent and at worst evil, right? At best, they'll mess up the Parisian lunch order, but at worst, they will put us on the road to serfdom. So I'm glad you also came to that realization, which led you to go and take over and run the Competitive Enterprise Institute. So you've been there a long time. Can, tell us more about the work that CEI is doing and what's intrinsically motivating you to be at the forefront of the fight that you're taking on?
Well, the people here were united not just in our purpose, which is CEI is an organization focused on economic regulatory questions, the regulation of economic behavior and our activities in that sphere of life. But we're also united here by some pretty basic ideas about human nature and how we ought to relate to each other. And these probably are not foreign ideas to you or your audience. They're really quite simple and things that even children can understand. Peaceful exchange is a pretty good thing, right? So if I have something of value, I should make it available or keep it to myself. But I don't need to use force to do either. And likewise, if there's something of value out there in the world that I would like to have, the best way to go about that is through peaceful exchange. And what we too often see is that in the economic sphere of life, the government steps in between people trying to sort out those questions for themselves. And they set rules or regulations or prices or other constraints on market behavior so that that peaceful exchange cannot happen. And it not only prevents exchanges so that we're all better off, but it then does make some of those exchanges worse off or more contentious or more friction laden. And we want to see as many of those exchanges take place as should take place, as well as the ones that do take place have lower levels of friction so that everything runs a little bit better. And at CEI, you see our work coming out the door on questions of labor policy or communications law. We do a great deal of work on energy and the environment, finance regulation, all of these things that have to do with economic behavior. That's really our lane and where we specialize.
Yeah, tell us more what that looks like on the ground in the everyday Americans' lives, like some of these exchanges, some of these policies that you're dealing with. Like, what does that mean at the kitchen table for Americans? What's an example of that?
Well, a lot of people might be familiar with a term of art, kitchen table economics. I think it might have even first come to us from Mario Cuomo some 20, 30 years ago. But the idea that you just asked about is when people are living their own life, visiting with their family, and they're making decisions about what they can do, whether they should save more, whether they should invest in a new roof for the house, whether they should take a trip, leisure activities, how much they're going to spend on this or that activity. Those decisions, they're dramatically shaped by things like access to credit and finance. So a great deal of discussion in our public debate today is around housing costs and affordability. It is likely the case that if you want to see more people afford ownership, you need a healthy credit system, right? So people can borrow and lend with confidence. So we're working on questions about making sure that all members of society can get credit-worthy access to risk capital, or you can take out a loan. That's what that means. We're recording this in the week leading up to a big national holiday, Thanksgiving. And I am cognizant it may appear nearly invisible to people today, but I'm cognizant that one of the reasons my middle daughter will be home with us is because of the widespread access to affordable airline travel. So what am I talking about there? In 1978, legislation was passed to deregulate air travel. Up to that point, we had done safety regulation through the FAA and economic regulation through something called the Civil Aeronautics Board, the CAB. And the CAB, that regulatory body, that Washington-based centralized authority, they decided what routes airlines could fly between which cities, what type of service on that route, so would there be first class or not. They regulated everything from the type of food service, how long people could be allowed to wait. Everything about that service was regulated. And the CAB, through that 1978 deregulation, was put on a path to extinction. It finally closed its doors in 1985, but the Congress deregulated all of the offerings, the routes, the types of services, even things like Southwest Airlines grew up in the wake of deregulation because they had an innovative or novel idea of how to run their airline with lower operational costs. They bought all the same size planes. And therefore, when you're going to fix a broken part, you don't have to have on the shelf parts for 10 different types of planes. You only need the parts for one type of plane. And that innovation in the style of service, the quantity of service, the routes, all of that made it possible for billions of dollars of consumer surplus. There's more than $1 billion in the first 12 years of deregulation. That means more people can afford to fly, including a 19-year-old student who lives in my home that I am happy to see this coming week during Thanksgiving. That's the sort of thing where there are several steps between maybe a proposal and a law and the way it affects people in their daily life. All of those steps need to be well understood. We do our best to anticipate consequences and use the best legal and economic reasoning available. But at the end of the day, what we really care about is putting choices in the hands of people making those decisions at their kitchen table.
Yeah, airlines, great example of how deregulation and removing barriers has made people more empowered. Housing, big issue today in America, slipping out of reach for young people. Tell us, how is the work that CEI is doing affecting the cost of housing or making housing more affordable for young Americans? How can removing barriers to housing access, how does that work from a liberty perspective?
So the main area where we're engaged there, two main areas. One is on finance, and really our objective is to make creditworthiness the uh, the core attribute for whether or not money gets lent out into the private sphere. And that means allowing lenders, banks, credit unions, etc., all sorts of institutions, including nonprofits. You don't have to be a chartered bank in order to understand the risk associated with a certain community or a certain person, to allow them to make risk-based judgments on whether to lend their money. Right now, there is a pull, a tendency among certain members of the political class to try to eliminate risk in our life, which is just not possible. You can have safetyism and try to move everything into the realm of there's no downside, there's no problem that ever emerges, no one ever fails, no one ever makes a mistake. Or you can have something that's reality-based, where people make their best judgments about the risk, they discount it, or they put interest rates on it appropriately, and they lend the money out. And so a lot of our work around finance is expanding the pool of people who will have access to credit. That is perhaps viewed as, initially you might hear that as, well, that sounds like a progressive goal, right? Helping more people be more fair. And to that I say, guilty as charged. But it's not because of a certain ideology. It's because I believe those people have the same basic essential rights to market exchanges as anyone else. The other place where we're really quite engaged, and maybe more than anyone would have expected recently, we've done just a tremendous amount of work in the last year and a half around trade policy. And this might be modestly counterintuitive for folks, but the basic logic works like this. If you want access to homes and you have a fixed stock, fixed number of them out there, one way to make more access is to build more homes. So we have a great deal of work to do around local permitting problems, local obstacles to getting started on that construction. But once those hurdles have been passed, the next big hurdle is the cost of building. So that's around labor policy, and especially around the imports of the things that go into the homes. The wood, the plastic, the concrete, all the insulation, all of those things are not made domestically. Many of them are imported. And when we decide on a whim to tax ourselves on all of those goods, whatever we build from those things are going to be more expensive. And as you artificially raise the price for political goals, you will see fewer and fewer people have access to them. So lumber is the big driver of that. There's a lot of housing that can be built without lumber, but most of it requires wood. And if you're going to be building anything other than high-rise apartment buildings, you're going to see lumber as a main input cost. And right now we're artificially taxing ourselves in order to accomplish some other goals.
These are big fights you're taking on, and oftentimes ones that are long ball games, right? They're intertwined in DC. There's many variables at play. It's a long path to victory. So how do you stay motivated to fight for liberty when sometimes these wins take a long time to achieve, and sometimes the fight feels like it never ends?
That's a great question. The basic idea behind motivation that I think many of us have internalized in the last couple of generations is there's internal and external, or intrinsic motivations. And you have to be pretty high on the intrinsic, the internal motivation, because if you're going to win a big policy battle once every 5 years or once every 10 years, or say in the example like educational choice, You can fight for 20 years and never win, and then start to see 2, 3, 4 wins, and then a waterfall effect, where in the last 3 years we've seen dozens of states adopt several different steps in the right direction. If that's the sort of debate you want to get into and fight you want to get into, you need to have really high internal motivation. And part of that is replenishing, right? It's like a wellspring. It comes up on its own, as a spring does out of the earth. But I think really important is I take the attitude. It's an idea that I've borrowed. A friend of mine, perhaps of yours in the audience, is a professor named Mike Munger. Mike's down at Duke University. He's an economist, taught political science for a long time. And Mike has explained that there's 2 types of libertarians. One type is a destination-based. They hold out for the right policy. That's the destination. They want to get to that one right best answer. And then there are directional libertarians. And those people will take incremental change as long as it continues to move in the right direction or open the door for future wins. So even if you don't make progress, but you've made it more likely that you'll succeed next year, that's good enough for now, because you're directionally moving toward a social environment, a society rooted in liberty. And I have found that the more and more I become a directional libertarian, the more and more motivated and happy that I am, because I can see progress more frequently. I see it all over the place. I also notice and see where we don't make progress, and that can be frustrating. But I don't stay frustrated or stay negative or stay down about things that are going the wrong direction or not making progress, because by being directionally oriented, rooted in liberty, I can see the progress happening.
Yeah, such as long as we're holding those who are standing in the way of the ultimate destination accountable, good to see that incremental progress. I think both certainly need to go hand in hand. Tell me, what does liberty mean to you at the raw personal level beyond, the politics, the policy, the high level philosophy? What does it mean to Kent personally?
Well, I will say I'm advantaged by any sort of liberal system in that I'm probably a little bit of an odd duck, right? So a society that doesn't call for uniformity or everybody to think the same way or have the exact same preferences or same habits or same favorite television shows, that's a society for me, because I'm quirky in all sorts of ways. I really boil down liberty to a quite simple phrase, and it's the measure by which I look at the world. And that is to say, liberty is allowing people to live their own life in their own way. Now, that's a slight adjustment to a line borrowed from Adam Smith and the theory of moral sentiments. He describes what the term he uses is natural liberty. And he says natural liberty is people pursuing their own interests in their own way. And I've changed that word interest to living their own life, because as long as you're not hurting people, taking away their property, doing harm to others, there are 1,000,001 ways to live your life. I really have no problem with any of them.
If someone listening wants to start making a difference for liberty, what's the best way that they can jump right in?
Well, I think it's really difficult but important that as much as you can early in your life, early in your career, your adult life especially, to get your arms around the ideas, the specific policy fights. Should the tax rate be 33% or 27%? Or should we do this or that with our trade policy or education or whatever it is catches your eye? The thing in the headline today that policy debate ultimately needs to be traced back to a really firm understanding of the core ideas of liberty and the core ideas of people and how they relate to one another and how you want to see them relate to one another. In order to do that, certainly there's classes and there's online tools and there's organizations that can nurture you along in the books. We talked a little bit about Hayek earlier. All of that is good and well, but the most practical advice that I have for a young person is to simply get engaged. Go take that job. Go volunteer. Go be involved for a month in a campaign. And in doing so, look around for the opportunities to identify someone or some group of people who can serve as a mentor. Working with someone who is willing to teach and shepherd moves you along so much faster, not only professionally, you get better professional outcomes, you get introduced to people, you get opportunities presented to you, but it helps you learn about the ideas because you see how that mentor thinks about the problem. And that I find works better for people than simply reading Adam Smith. Although I will caution no one away from reading Adam Smith. We all should spend a little bit of time with him.
Yeah, absolutely. His theories on what makes us truly happy, absent all the economics work he's done, I found fascinating, which I'll leave the listener to peruse at their own leisure. But would you give the same advice to someone who's maybe more established in life, a parent or a grandparent, someone in mid-career, maybe is just starting to dabble in politics and liberty? Would you give the same guidance? Would it change at all?
Well, I think the internships are probably tougher for someone running a household. But I would counsel, particularly if you think you've identified someone who has something to offer. And here, I mean, a very specific individual, a writer, a politician, a speaker, an organization like your own that offers programming. I think people would be surprised to learn how effective it is that if they pick up the phone and try to speak with someone, they oftentimes can get a hold of that person. If you send an email or, God forbid, an actual letter using a pen, those things get answered. And if you don't ask for everything under the sun, but I get requests that say, what should I read on the following topic? Right? And usually it takes 30 seconds to say, here's three great things to read, right? It's just a simple email. Those marginal costs are very low. I understand the frustration of sending, 15 emails to info at, whatever. But the demonstration of curiosity and humility goes a long way because after all, the people that you're trying to learn from, they're only people, right? They're not special. And none of us are that special. We might have specialized and therefore have something to offer, but basic things like courtesy and curiosity, they go an awful long way.
Absolutely. And politicians, actually the most ordinary people of all. Not special people, just folks who are in positions of power.
This is true. There's a selection criteria for politicians. They happen to be good at getting people to like them. And I would remind you of Lassman's first law. Any given group of people, half of them are below average. That includes your politicians.
Lassman's first law. I'll be start attributing that quote to you. Last question. When you think about the future of our country, what keeps you optimistic that the fight for liberty will only grow stronger?
I am very optimistic that the movement toward liberty and those who are advocating for it, the fight, will become stronger. However, I'm not deterministic about it. I would not use the word will. I think it's probable. I think it's likely. I'm going to do everything in my power to make it so. But there's no guarantee. And the baseline state of how people get along with each other is really quite ugly. It's warfare. It's poverty. It's the destruction of knowledge, not the creation of knowledge and distribution of knowledge. It is tribalism in its worst forms. That's the baseline. That's what we have seen most often through history. That is what we have seen around the world. And what I consistently remind people is the tailwind that we have and we can leverage are institutions of liberty. It is a good and wonderful thing to have hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands and perhaps millions of people oriented toward basic liberal ideas organized around liberty. Market capitalism points us this direction. Limited government ideas point us in this direction. Montesquieu's idea of the division of authorities and powers in government, different branches of government, point us in this direction. But it's through the institutions of liberty that those people can work their magic, right? And can influence not only the world that we're going to live in, but the world that will be inherited by those after us. In America, we have tremendous institutions of liberty. Some of them are nonprofits. Some of them are baked into the organization of our government, constitutional institutions. Some of them are norms of life. All of them combined make me tremendously optimistic. And in large part, I think not just in my lifetime, certainly not just my career, not just my lifetime, but for several hundred years, we have been moving toward a more liberal order. And that is a trajectory that I have every reason to think we can continue.
Tremendous. Very good. Kent, thank you for joining us and reminding us that liberty thrives when people are free to innovate, free to work, and live without unnecessary government interference. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe to Voices of Liberty on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pandora, or YouTube. And to learn more about how you can be a part of the movement advancing freedom in our lifetime, visit yaliberty.org. I'm Sean Themea, and thank you for listening to Voices of Liberty, where we keep the torch of liberty burning by telling the stories of those who carry it forward. See you next time.